In his book, The Blind Watchmaker, Richard Dawkins wants to illustrate the process of evolution. You know, it's a little hard to believe that random mutations could create the entire biosphere. So Richard Dawkins wants to give that an illustration and show how when you couple it with natural selection, it all works out. So he sets up this example. He writes a computer program and starts with a random sequence of English letters and then mutates it, simulating evolution, mutating each letter randomly. And he eventually gets to a Shakespeare phrase, methinks it like a weasel from Hamlet. So he gets that in short order and says, yeah, here's a great example of how things work. Now, it's actually problematic because he's using methinks it like a weasel as his target. So if a mutation occurs that matches up with the needed letter, it is deemed to be high fitness, it is retained. If not, it is dropped. So his target is the phrase he's trying to evolve. So it really is not a faithful reproduction or simulation of the evolutionary process. Now, Dawkins understands that, and he talks about that. He still thinks it's a good example. So he says, look, I know this is misleading. The mutant progeny phrases were judged according to the criterion of resemblance to a distant ideal target, the phrase, methinks it like a weasel. Life isn't like that. Evolution has no long-term goal. There is no long-distance target. What he's saying is there's no teleology, and yet he has snuck in teleology into his experiment. But he's admitting that, and he says, yeah, I realize that, but I like it anyway. So Dawkins understood his Shakespeare example is not a model of evolution, yet he claimed his Shakespeare example showed the power of accumulating small changes. That's what he was after, this idea of accumulating small changes. He thinks that is something he wants to get across to the reader. But that is false. False because Dawkins used a phony fitness function. It isn't evolution, so it doesn't show the power of accumulating small changes. And Dawkins has gotten a lot of criticism for that. Okay, what about this paper I've been looking at, this recent paper that claims to have solved the problem of protein evolution, rapid protein evolution, in the early age of evolution, billions of years ago? How did all these proteins rapidly evolve? So what about this paper? Well, like Dawkins, the paper uses a phony fitness function. It uses the number of long-range contacts as the main driver, as we've looked at in the last couple of videos. The number of long-range contacts is goal-directed. This is teleology sneaked into the science in kind of a subtle way. And like Dawkins, the paper admits that there is an underlying problem. Let's look at what they say here. The nature of the selection factors that drove protein evolution at the early stages of evolution, before the advent of distinct protein folds, is an inherently difficult problem. See, so if you didn't believe me what I was saying in the last few videos, here it is. I mean, you can see it throughout the literature. It's not controversial, but they talk about it here in the introduction of the paper. It is an inherently difficult problem that currently, may not admit a definitive solution. So they've got this problem, and they don't provide a solution to it. They're not going to solve this in this paper. Instead, they sneak in teleology. And like Dawkins, they present their results as meaningful. Let's have a look here. We show how stable globular protein folds could evolve from random amino acid sequences. No, they didn't show that. The principal result of this work is that emergence of simple, stable globular protein folds from random amino acid sequences is relatively easy and could occur quickly. No, that is not a result of the work. It was a numerical exercise, a computational exercise, not evolution. This is all false because it is teleology snuck into the science. Okay, now there are more problems with the paper that I have not talked about, and one of them is that they assume the prior existence of the genetic code. Well, you have to have a genetic code. If you're going to evolve proteins, proteins require a genetic code in order to be expressed. So, and created and synthesized in the cellular environment, you need a genetic code. So they assume that there's this genetic code up and running. Well, the genetic code requires an army of proteins. So you're trying to explain how proteins first evolved, the enigma of rapid early protein evolution, and yet you have to have an army of pre-existing proteins. So that doesn't make any sense. That's circular. Now they talk about that and they get around the problem by assuming a genetic code that doesn't use proteins. So they have this earlier version of the genetic code that doesn't use proteins. Yes, today's extant genetic code is employing an army of proteins, but in the early stages of evolution there was this other genetic code. It's the same code, but there were no proteins. There's no such thing. Religion drives science, and it matters.